You're listening to WTMFI 67.42 FM Chicago.
Alrighty, welcome in everybody. I'm going to get started right now. So this is my Star Wars Facts of the Day weekly review. So I take this opportunity once a week. I post up Fact of the Day for Star Wars every day during the week, Monday through Friday. Then I take a day off for Saturday and Sunday. I do a full review of all the facts and I go into more in-depth detail on each fact. So thank you for all of you that have shown up. I'm going to keep it open for as many people as I can. And I'm going to go through each of the facts and give as many details as I can. I appreciate all the likes, shares, and gifts you're willing to give. I appreciate it so very much, and I enjoy doing this. So if you enjoy it, comment, let me know how much you like it. And especially if you guys have facts that you would like to talk about, let me know in the chat. I would love to chat more on it as I go through each of these facts. And if there's something specific you want to hear about, or if you want me to go into more detail, I can definitely do that. There's a lot of interesting facts I brought up this week, and I'm really excited to talk about them. So I'm going to jump right in. So let's go through the facts of the day for this week. Fact of the day. Star Wars fact of the day. Lothcats are a non-sentient member of the feline Tuca species. Native specifically to Lothal, but are often found in the grassy plains of the Outer Rim planets. They are small, temperamental creatures. Sorry for a second. I got myself a little thrown off here. Tucas, while at times friendly, are still able hunters with sharp teeth and claws. Tucas are also called Tuca cats or Odorous felines that are common feline species to multiple core worlds. They were popular as pets and also as carnivores that ate many unwanted pests, but they also are considered by many to be feral nuisances themselves. When properly trained, they could be excellent hunters of pests. One specific breed of Tuca was the Lothcat, native to the planet Lothal. Tuca were known to enjoy milk. Tuca are also common in the underworld of Coruscant, where they hunt Nuna, which are small pests and rats-like creatures. Properly trained, they became affectionate as well as effective pest hunters, which has led to their proliferation across worlds as freighter captains and other spacefarers use Tucas to get rid of their ship holds of vermin. Tuca cats are also commonplace that they are often represented as stuffed toys or cartoon illustrations that play up their playful and or predatory nature. The idiom Tuca cat ate that blula bird referred to a person who appeared self-satisfied or smug. The saying, a tuk got your tongue, was used to encourage someone who has been unusually quiet to speak out. Look what the Tuca dragged in, is what is used to call attention to someone who entered an area. Look, Tuca's out of the bag meant that a secret has become known. So I had a lot of fun researching this one. I did not know that there was so much more behind Lothcats than just the basic stuff. So it was a lot of fun finding out all these little facts about the Tuca cat, and that the Lothcat was just, if some of you who have watched Star Wars Rebels, the Lothcat is predominantly shown on Lothal. But as the popularity of Star Wars has grown over the last few years, there's been a lot of material that has become available in regard to that. So you can actually go online and you can find a lot more stuff about the Lothcats and the Tuca cats because they come in multiple different forms. They're usually striped. They have almost like chicken-like clawed legs, and they have a very wide mouth it has very sharp teeth. But if you've watched maybe Litterbox Train, that is a great question. That's one of the things that I haven't seen in Star Wars yet, is that they haven't actually shown how the Lothcats are actually taken care of. But if in the ones that I've seen that were in Star Wars Rebels, they were more like street animals. So my guess is they pretty much do their business wherever they want. Though I'm curious as to what kind of litter would actually be used in Star Wars. My guess is it's going to be a polymer variant of what we use, but I don't know what they would actually use for that. But I'm sure the scents is probably a lot better than the ones here, and there's probably the technology is there to completely remove any scents from the house. And Though I don't know how allergies work with lothcats, though that would probably be another whole thing that has to do with dander and stuff like that. But they are kept as pets. So my guess is there's the people that have lothcats for pets, and they also have to deal with the litter, shedding, and all that kind of stuff. So who knows? This is more stuff that I'm hoping someday Star Wars goes into, specifically since Disney has access to it. I'm sure there's plenty of Lothcat and Tuca cat toys that are available. I haven't had a chance to go to Star Wars Galaxy's Edge at Disney Worlds, and I'm sure they probably have them there. Because if you watch, Star Wars Rebels, Andor, and Ahsoka, we've seen the Lothcats all over the place. They are pretty common. So my guess is they are planning on doing more with them in a merchandising aspect. So I'm sure we're going to see a lot more of that. And I thought it was really cool to actually delve into this and find out more about the Lothcats and find out more about them, because I think they're a really cool, interesting species that has been brought in. And there's so many species of animals and creatures in Star Wars that I could spend an entire month of Fact of the Days just covering that. So I try to bring up at least one or two throughout the week so that way I can actually cover all of them. I'm probably going to limit it to one. Like I usually do one animal, a certain aspect of politics or species, and then I cover ships and stuff like that. So I wanted to cover Lothcats this week because I thought they were really cool animals. Okay, so let's move on to the next fact. Star Wars fact of the day: Bothans were a group known for operating a spy network. Bothans are furry, mammalian, and highly intelligent humanoid species from the Star Wars universe. Bothans were known for operating a spy network. Bothans are about 1.5 meters tall, have canine, feline, and equine features. They communicate through growls and speak Bothan, with Botha being the written form. Bothan spies were credited with obtaining information concerning the location of the second Death Star battle station, despite sustaining heavy casualties, thereby enabling the Rebel Alliance to plan an attack on the unfinished station. Bothans are also provided the Rebel Alliance with other useful information, such as door codes for the shield generators. Sorry about that, I lost my place. For the shield generator bunker on the Force Moon of Endor, they forged false chain codes that were implanted into Aqualish by Neutralian doctors. We learn about the Bothans in Star Wars Episode 6, Return of the Jedi, but we don't actually see them. This is what I thought was interesting. Currently, we only have a few ways to know what the species actually looked like, mostly video game appearances, but no official canon appearance on screen. In the EU legends, there is a much more detailed overview of the Bothan species and their status in the Star Wars universe, but it currently is not canon. Hopefully in the future Star Wars features, we will finally properly be introduced to this rebellious group that assisted the Rebel Alliance in defeating the Empire at the Battle of Endor. Now, I've been wanting to cover this for a while, and it is not really popular along a lot of the chat groups that I've frequented regarding Star Wars, is that you don't find out that much, T and Phil, welcome in, about the Bothans. They are only really mentioned in Return of the Jedi. And I think there's a few references in a few others, but they weren't brought up in Andor as far as I can remember. Though I during my research, I was trying to figure out other locations, but there's very few locations. The one where you actually do see the Bothans and they're actually in action is in classic Star Wars Battleground. In Star Wars Battleground 2, Bothans are actually one of the playable characters. Now, they're not like actually doing anything, and they don't really speak, because there's basically the sounds that they just include with the game. It's similar to the way in Star Wars Battlefront 2, where you get to play the Wookiees. The Wookiees just make growls and grunts and stuff like that, same as the Bothans. But they don't really say much. But you find out in Star Wars Return of the Jedi that they were the ones who actually got the plans for the Rebel Alliance. Now, this is interesting for me, and I'm really hoping that we get something about this in the future, because this is something that I brought up before with Shadows of the with Shadows of the Empire that it takes place during that empty space between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. Now, this I have been reading about in the Star Wars Marvel comics that's available, which if you have not read, I highly recommend them because they are so good. They fill in a lot of the timeline. Though technically, I don't know if that Star Wars is technically canon. It's currently being published right now, and a lot of the information in there has not been decanonized. So as far as I know, it's considered canon. Though Marvel Comics and Disney, I don't know how they're communicating. And as far as I know, Filoni is not working directly with Marvel Comics. So I don't know what the status is on that. So it's kind of up in the air right now whether or not it is canon. And a lot of stuff that Marvel Comics has published has not been made canon. So it's a question of whether or not they will eventually make it canon. But I like reading it because it's filling in a lot of details. And one of the things that we've got right now is Crimson Dawn. And if you don't remember that, that was actually used in Solo, the Solo series. That's Han Solo's ex, who was actually involved with the underworld. Well, her organization is currently involved with Leia in the comics. Now, I don't know if that's ever going to be actually put into canon, but there is a lot of stuff going on that makes me think that there is a possibility. I'm not saying this is going to happen, but from a fan point of view, I could see a series being done between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi that's kind of like Andor or Rogue One, where we see the whole process of how the rebels, find out about the second Death Star, 2, how they get a hold of the plans, and 3, what's involved leading up to that point. Because, of course, we've got the story of Luke, Lando, Leia, and Chewie and the droids finding out where Han actually is. And we find out that he's on his way to Jabba the Hutt. Now, Shadows of the Empire did cover a lot of this, but technically it's been decanonized, so we can't rely on that right now. But we do still have the information about what we know about Crimson Dawn and stuff like that, which, because Han Solo's past girlfriend is currently part of Crimson Dawn, she might want to help out the Alliance in finding Captain Solo. And this is the reason why I think there's a possibility it might happen. Now, again, this is all based on what Filoni wants to do, because Filoni is now in charge of the way Star Wars is done through Disney. But I have enough belief in Filoni that I would like to see that he comes up with the idea of doing this. I know he's kind of focused on Ahsoka and Mandalorian right now, so I don't know what's going to happen. But there's a chance that I'm sure writers are thinking about new ideas and stuff like that. And because there's so many fans out there who really enjoy the original series and the stuff that's come directly after the New Republic has been built up, leading into the sequels, and a lot of fans are getting involved with that. I mean, Mandalorian's been a success. Book of Boba Fett has been a success. Rogue One was a huge success. Andor was a huge success. So I could see them joining in on that and going for something that happens between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, because there's a lot of material there that could easily be used. So I'm inclined to think it, and I'm going to continue reading the comics because there's a lot there. So I'm reading the comics right now to find out what's happening in that time period, because there's a lot of short stories and stuff like that are going on. So again, none of it's canon, but it sure looks interesting to me. So I definitely want to check it out. Okay, so that's the reason why I brought up the Bothans, because we still don't know a lot about them. And I think that time period between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi is the perfect location. If they wanted to create another Andor or Rogue One, that would be the time period to do it. And the thing that I really like about it is where we'd really get an Andor situation is, remember, we find this out in Return of the Jedi, that the Emperor allowed the Alliance to find out about the second Death Star. That's how we get the famous Akbar line, "It's a trap," because you find out that the Empire suckered the Rebel Alliance into that battle. So this makes me think there could be an entire background story that goes into how the Empire and the ISB, who we find out about in Andor, decides that they're going to take the advantage and try to use this to sucker the rebels into coming into this battle. And you already see this kind of stuff if you read the comics, the Star Wars comic series after Empire Strikes Back. There is a really great story going on right now. I mean, there's a huge story that goes on that takes place between New Hope and the Battle of Hoth that I highly recommend reading, because it's such a good story. I mean, they go into detail about Han, about Leia, about Luke, Chewie. They bring in alternate characters, specifically Black Chrysanthemum, who you encounter in Book of Boba Fett, and Dr. Aphra, who I am so hoping we finally get her in live action. I'm hoping she comes in at some point. I don't know if she is, but I know there's a few other fans out there who would really like her brought in. So I think that would be a great opportunity for the Bothans to finally be able to take center stage. Okay, I spent a lot more time on that than I wanted to, but moving on to the next fact, I really am hoping that turns out. Okay, next fact. Star Wars fact of the day: cloning was the process of duplicating an organism into one or many genetically identical individuals. The procedure was perfected into a form of genetic art by the Kaminoan species from the planet Kamino. Known as clones, the scientific procedure of growing a clone from the genetic template of a living organism is a major technological advancement over generations of research and development on Kamino. Kaminoans, using the template DNA as the foundation for clones, which could number from at least one genetic copy to millions of specimens that shared the same face, voice, and even skills inherited from the original source. The template's genetic code could be altered through modifications to the cloning process for various purposes, including growth acceleration and greater docility or docileness. Without alterations to the genome, a clone would be the exact duplicate of its template at the genetic level. The practice of cloning humans was an imperfect science. In spite of the Kaminoans' efforts to perfect the art, it was still possible to discover the occasional genetic or physical defects in their specimens, producing both wanted and unwanted results. Millions of clones could be grown from a single genetic sample, but only while it was viable. Over time, the sample would degrade. Therefore, clones required regular access to the original source or donor in order to extract replacement samples. Otherwise, a new host would have to be adopted to continue the cloning production. Now, I wanted to cover this because there is a lot more going on with the clones than a lot of people realize. And we really got a touch on this because cloning is actually done throughout a lot of Star Wars. I mean, we have the original Clone Wars, which when I was growing up and we first heard about the Clone Wars in Star Wars Episode 4, we don't know that much about it. We heard it was the Clone Wars, but we don't know what the Clone Wars actually was. We were completely in the dark as to what the Clone Wars was actually about. You know, we knew the word clone because we had heard about that kind of thing in sci-fi and stuff for years. So we knew that a clone was a duplicate of a person, but we didn't know the details of what the Clone War actually was. Me personally, I thought that maybe it was just they figured out cloning and they decided to start duplicating a bunch of people, but the clones realized that they had their own individuality, so they decided to start a war on their own for their own individual, presence. But of course, we find out what the Clone Wars actually was. Is that basically one side of the opponents were using droids, and since droids could be manufactured at an alarming rate, and they had already all the corporations that were involved with droids had started building their own. So then the opposite side was the clones, where they were using cloning technology to create thousands upon millions of clones to be used in combat. So this is the really aspect of you basically have clones of droids and clones of people basically having combat. Now, it's interesting that the cloning that we see, they don't actually include any other species. They only included the humans, which I thought was interesting, but at the same time, you learn now that the whole reason why it happened in Attack of the Clones, you find out is because they were using a bounty hunter, which you find out, about Jango Fett and all that kind of thing. But the interesting thing about that is you learn this in the Clone Wars TV series as well as Bad Batch, that the cloning process, since Jango Fett was killed during the Battle of Geonosis, they still had a biome. Hi, Suburban Sugar, welcome in. I'm just going through Star Wars Facts of the Day. So right now I'm on the cloning process, and I was covering that in Bad Batch, we find out that Omega was pretty much a exact duplicate of Jango Fett. We also find out that Alpha, Beta, the other one, was Boba. Boba Fett was the other genetic clone that was an exact duplicate. So that's the interesting thing about that, is that they were working on the genome the entire time, which is the reason why we not only got Omega, but we got Hunter, Tank, Crosshair, and Tech, which were the alternate clones, but in the positive way, they were alternate. But we find out about the whole thing with Omega was she was the only clone that actually had access to the midichlorians that the Emperor wanted to use for his cloning process. This is the reason why she was so unique. She's the only clone out of all the thousands upon thousands of clones that were used for the Clone Wars. She was the only one that gained Force capability. But what I really thought was interesting about the whole cloning process is you get those personality traits that keep repeating themselves in the clones, because you've got the sensitive side to the clones in so many characters like Kix and Dogma and Tup, but you also have those aggressive traits of Heavy and Fives and Echo, but you have the intelligence aspect of Echo and Tech that are all based off of Jango Fett's design. And I always thought that was so super cool, that even though you got thousands upon thousands of clones, a personality is still able to exist. Now, granted, you may have copies of that personality throughout the different clones, but until the clones actually developed and survived in the war, you didn't find out these personality traits. Because when they're really like a grunt... Thanks, Homer. When they're actually going into combat, a lot of the clones would get eliminated right off the bat. They'd be shot and killed during combat, and they'd be wiped out by the divisions. I mean, anybody who's ever watched any documentaries on clones about the death counts of these kinds of battles, you knew that a lot of the clones and a lot of the droids went down. So you had an understanding that the clones had to be produced at a regular rate. They also had to be trained at a regular rate. And the Clone Wars TV series, we really get that aspect in how they're trained, how they're put out in the field, but also the situations where so many of the clones had to be sacrificed in those battles. And you really got that connection with the clones because you didn't know how long they were going to be on screen. And that's why I always found it interesting when we were introduced to a new clone or a new sergeant or a new captain or something like that, because you never knew how long they were going to be on screen. I mean, I always thought that was both kind of sad but also kind of cool, because you realized as the series was going that you had to be careful about how you got introduced to these characters. Copper Boom, welcome in. Copper Boom. Gilmore Girls, I like that. But sorry, that was the reason why I thought it was so interesting about the clones, is that you really got that aspect of you never knew how long they were going to live. So when they were on screen, you really got kind of excited. Oh, wow, maybe this one's going to survive. Oh, maybe he's going to live. Oh, they got that aspect. The reason why the series was so good is you had all these characters that you could care about, but you never knew how long they were going to be there. And it was always the biggest thing for me because I was a big fan of Rex. And of course, we knew about Commander Cody because he was the one that we ended up seeing in Revenge of the Sith. So we knew watching Clone Wars that he was going to survive. We knew that right off the bat. But you didn't know if Captain Rex was going to live or any of the other clones. But we all know what happened to the clones at the end of the series and into Revenge of the Sith. So I always... Poor 99, thank you. Yes, absolutely. 99 was a prime example of that, where you saw him on Camino, and you were always wondering yourself, how long is he going to live? And that he was just working as a custodian. And it's silly, like, man, what a life for this clone, where he was originally bred to be a soldier, but then he never gets to be a soldier until he finally passes. And then it's like... he went out the way he wanted to always serve. He wanted to feel that aspect of serving with his brothers in combat. And when he finally gets that, he ends up getting killed. And I know a lot of fans who, at that moment when we see 99 go down, I mean, you really felt that, which I think was really nicely done that Clone Force 99 was named that. And it's really showing that homage to 99 in his serving, regardless of his position. He was still a soldier with the Army of the Republic. Which, now that I brought that up, brings me over to the next topic, next facts of the day. The Grand Army of the Republic was part of an elaborate plan by Darth Sidious to gain control of the Galactic Republic. Jedi Master Sifo Dyas was gifted in foresight and saw the coming war in the galaxy. Sifo Dyas secretly commissioned an army to be built by the Kaminoans without the permission of the Jedi Council or the Republic Senate. However, the Sith Lord Darth Tyrannus, who was Sifo-Dyas' friend and former Jedi Master Dooku, learned of what Sifo-Dyas had done. Under the orders of Darth Sidious, Jedi Sifo-Dyas was killed, and the Sith took over control of the correspondence with the Kaminoans to maintain the creation of the clone army for the Republic, all using the name Sifo-Dyas. The Sith hired bounty hunter Jango Fett to be the genetic donor for the army and had the Kaminoans engineer organic chips to be installed in every clone in order to make them more susceptible to orders and to house a very specific layer of orders to be activated when the correct order was given. The Sith had already begun creating chaos in the galaxy, political and commerce political and commerce divisions, which was beginning to cause strife and resentment. This led to the invasion of the planet Naboo and the organization of a confederacy of planets looking to take control of the interstellar trade routes. The separatist group was led by Sith Lord Darth Tyrannus, or Dooku, under the guidance of Darth Sidious. When Obi-Wan Kenobi arrived on Kamino during an investigation into the assassination attempt against Senator Padme Amidala of Naboo, he discovered the information about the army and forwarded it to his superiors. A confrontation between the separatist droid forces and the Jedi on Geonosis proved to be too much for the Jedi to handle as peace officers. The Senate, under the leadership of Chancellor Palpatine, then sent the clone army to assist the Jedi. This army became the Grand Army of the Republic, who would serve with the Jedi as its command structure during the Clone Wars. Now, this is what I was building up to. Oh, Obi-Wan, welcome in. Thanks for coming in. Homeless Mandalorian, welcome in. Thanks so much for coming in. So no worries about being late. For all of you, if you are coming in late, I will be loading this whole thing up to the link on my profile, so you can watch this whole thing and go through all the facts with me through that. I will be loading up to that link once I'm finished up. It'll take a little while, but you can actually view all my past ones as well. So the reason I wanted to cover this fact is I wanted to go into a little more detail about how the Grand Army of the Republic was created, because there was a lot I didn't know for sure. So I wanted to really research this, and I found out so much more about what happened during this. And it's something I wanted to share with a lot of you, is that Jedi Master Sifo-Dyas was not considered a Sith. I know the way it's portrayed in the movie Attack of the Clones, you get the impression that Sifo-Dyas was one of Darth Sidious's agents. But as I did my research, I found out he was not. He was a loyal Jedi to the Republic. He saw what was coming. He had the foresight to actually see what was coming, which was the reason why he wanted the army built. Because his vision told him that something was going to happen and the Jedi weren't going to be able to handle it. Now, here's where I really wanted to make sure, and I already talked to one of my other friends about this because they asked me about this and why I went into this detail. Because this is something you have to remember about the Jedi and seeing into the future. We learn this in Empire Strikes Back when Luke has his vision of the future, where he sees what's happening to Leia, Han, Chewie, and everybody in Cloud City, is that he sees that they were in pain, and he sees the city in the clouds. And he wants to know what's going to happen, and he asks Yoda if they will die. And Yoda's line is, difficult to see. Always in motion is the future. And we get this a lot more. You find out just before Luke leaves that Yoda really doesn't want him to do this. And he is under the impression that his friends are going to die. But even Obi-Wan comes in and says, you don't know that. Even Yoda cannot see their fate. Which Yoda was way more powerful than Luke and had more of a connection to the Force than Luke ever had at that time. So he could see that. And this is something that is also brought up in Revenge of the Sith. When you see Anakin having the nightmares about Padme and what she was going through, and you could hear the babies crying. But it's very blurry. It's not clear. This is because it wasn't set yet. It was just a view of a possible future. Again, seeing Obi-Wan there. and actually being a part of that, which brings up the question, why didn't he see himself there? This is all interesting stuff that comes up in that. And that's the reason why I wanted to cover this, is when you really got into that aspect, you didn't understand what was going on. So this is why you can't trust the visions of the future. The Jedi weren't able to. And the thing was, Sifo-Dyas went to the Jedi Council. He explained what he saw, but the Council was like, wait a minute. We know for a fact that we cannot see clearly into the future. So what you see might not be what actually happens. But Sifo-Dyas, like Anakin, and like so many others who have their vision of the future, they run straight through, go rogue, and decide to do what they think is best without taking into fact that what they're doing might not be the best thing, because he didn't know for sure what was coming. He didn't know what the final result was. And so he creates the army. He goes through the process of doing it. And what happens? His mentor, Count Dooku, who at that time, when we find out, if you need to know this on the timeline, I actually was looking into this because there's the Tales of the Jedi and the Tales of the Empire and all that, those short series that are done, where we see the story of Dooku, where he is seduced by Darth Sidious, and he ends up killing Jedi Master Yaddle, who also, if you don't remember this, is a member of Yoda's species. I want you to, if you guys have not seen that, I highly recommend going and watching that series, because you get a lot more detail about Dooku and who he is. And this is the reason why I really wanted to cover this, is because there is so much more behind Sifo-Dyas' decision, because he wanted to protect the Republic. He wanted to make sure that the Republic survived, and he thought this was the best way to do it. So similar to the way Qui-Gon went off on his own, the way Anakin went off his own, did his own thing without taking the wisdom of the Council into fact and to a matter, they ended up inadvertently and without their knowledge assisting the Sith in taking over. Because basically, by creating the Grand Army of the Republic, it could have been that the Jedi had a different way of defeating the army. We don't know for sure, because the clones came in and they were able to, but the clones came in corrupted by the Sith without the Jedi's knowledge. Juan, welcome in. So you never knew exactly where. Now, us as the fans, us watching the movies, we know that something was going to happen, because we found out in Star Wars A New Hope that Obi-Wan survived, and he said the Empire worked with Darth Vader to hunt down and destroy the Jedi Knights. Now, we knew that was coming. We didn't know how it was going to happen, but we knew it was coming. And it was then when we saw in Revenge of the Sith, when he does Order 66, that the clones all turned. Now, we didn't know for sure how that was actually happening, that they just automatically just switched over, and they just started attacking the Jedi. Deadpool, welcome in. And that was what I thought was super cool that was covered in Clone Wars, that you find out that it was an involuntary action, that the chips inside the clone's head, they just turned them. You know, there was no decision-making process in it. They were automatically just switched over, so that they had no will when it came to that order. They could not change their opinions or, have a second thought. Which, if you watch in Clone Wars at the finale episode where Captain Rex is standing there and he receives the Order 66, you see him, Ahsoka comes in, and you can see him fighting. You see his hands are shaking, and that he drops his helmet, and then he turns, he says, "No, I'll do it." That's very clear. His voice doesn't stutter or anything, but when he pulls his pistols, his hands are shaking the entire time, because his will is actually fighting that order, but he can't stop himself. But he gets off just enough of a message of find him, Fives, find him, Fives, and that's the only message he could get to Ahsoka, which was all she needed, thankfully, to be able to survive. But in that one moment, you realized that the clones had no choice in that. They didn't have a way of fighting this order because of the way it was built in. And that's one of the more interesting aspects about the Clone Wars and the whole story of the Grand Army of the Republic, that they were originally, their intent was a positive, but because of the corruption of the Sith that happened, they ended up being turned against the Jedi. And I just thought that was such a cool storyline that was brought in there. And the fact that we got so much more out of it because of that, it was amazing. And I just really love that whole aspect about that, is that we really find out so much more about what happened with not only the Grand Army of the Apartment, but the cloning process and Bad Batch and the end of Clone Wars really gives us a clear view about how deep the corruption was. So I really wanted to cover that fact, and I know I spent a lot of time on that because those are the few points that I really wanted to cover with those. Okay. Hope you guys enjoyed that one. We're moving on to the next and I believe the last fact. Yes, so Star Wars fact of the day. The B-Wing, also known as the ASF-01 Starfighter, is a single-pilot, heavily armed and shielded attack vessel and bomber used by the Rebellion in the Galactic Civil War, designed by Admiral Akbar and Engineer Quarry. Manufactured by Salen and Corporeal, and perhaps the oddest looking starfighter in the Rebel Alliance fleet, the B-Wing or Blade Wing fighter is as powerful as it is ungainly. The ship's structure is almost entirely taken up by its primary airfoil, which houses a cylindrical cockpit on one end and an engine cluster at the center and heavily weapons pod at its base. The B-Wing was more heavily armored than the X-Wing and A-Wing, but slower than the A-Wing. So the B-Wing had a speed of approximately the same as an X-Wing, but not its maneuverability. The cockpit of the B-Wing was a unique gyroscopic control system. The pilot can orient so that it always stays level with the horizon line. No matter which way the B-Wing may maneuver laterally, its pilot remains upright, which means that the pilot's here and the ship just rotates around it. The engine cluster in the center consists of a single Chiromaster ion engine with 4 thrusters nozzles, along with the ship's fusion reactor, a Class and a Class II hyperdrive. Rebel engineers designed the B-Wing with a single purpose: to destroy Imperial capital ships. To achieve that goal, they packed weaponry and flight systems normally reserved for a large craft into the body of a starfighter. B-Wings weren't much good in dogfights. Their pilots complained that they maneuvered like freighters and were a struggle to maintain. But the B-Wing's potential combination of weapons made it a deadly assault fighter and a worthy addition to the Alliance arsenal. B-Wings proved their worth at the Battle of Endor with the pilots of Blade Squadron using group tactics to target Imperial Star Destroyers. The original prototype of the Blade Wing had 2 cockpits and a powerful multi-cannon which had the firepower strong enough to destroy an Imperial cruiser. This is probably one of my all-time favorite Star Wars vehicles. Now, I've said before that I'm a big fan of the T-47 Speeder, and I love the X-Wing, but the B-Wing I thought was one of the coolest ones. Eddie, welcome in. That got added into Star Wars. And we're first introduced to the B-Wing in Star Wars Return of the Jedi. But if you notice, we see the ship flying along with the Rebels, but we don't see it actually in combat. And the interesting thing is that you only saw it for the initial arrival at Endor and when it puts his wings out. And we see the B-Wing in its full form. Now, we actually get to see it in action in Star Wars Rebels with Hera and Sabine piloting it. Because in the original, in Star Wars Rebels, we actually see the original prototype. Now, in the EU, we found out that the B-Wing was designed by Admiral Akbar, but we didn't know how far he was involved in the process, which is the reason why I included it, because that's still considered a canon thing. But Quarry, he was the one who actually physically designed the ship and actually built the first prototype. And we see that in Star Wars Clone Wars. But we didn't see in Star Wars Return of the Jedi was how effective the B-Wing was in combat. This is something that always kind of bothered me, and we never actually get to actually use the B-Wing. And this is something that I have kind of complained about in Star Wars Battlefront, Star Wars X-Wing, and Squadrons. You don't actually get to fly the B-Wing. And this is something that I always found frustrating because, you know, I was a big fan of Star Wars X-Wing when it first came out, Star Wars Rogue Squadron, Star Wars TIE Fighter, because I played those original PC games when I was younger and I was in college, because I loved those games. But you never got to fly the B-Wing, which this is a ship that was specifically designed and built to destroy capital ships. And the thing that I thought was super cool is when you see the prototype in Star Wars Rebels, the thing had a basically a tiny version of a Death Star cannon. I mean, literally the lasers come together and the beam comes out and destroys a cruiser. I mean, I thought that was super cool. It's like, oh, does that mean that the squadron actually destroyed Death Stars? Because this is something that I thought was super cool. Is there is a scene in Return of the Jedi, I don't know the exact timing point, but it's the one where Akbar says, we've got to give those fighters small time. Concentrate all fire on the Super Star Destroyer. And if you guys go and watch that scene, it's just before the Super Star Destroyer is destroyed. In the viewfinder behind Akbar, you see a Star Destroyer explode. You almost don't see it because you're focusing on what Akbar's saying in some of the background, but it's in the background. You see a Star Destroyer explode. And I think that's one of the ones that was targeted by Blade Squadron, the B-Wings, and destroyed it. And I am pretty sure, and I actually read about this. It was something, I'm forgetting which it was. I think it was in Star Wars Insider or Starlog magazine, and you can look this up online. There was a story of what happened with Blade Squadron. And it was not quite a comic, but it was basically a story within a story telling about what happened with Blade Squadron, that the majority of the squadron was wiped out. Like, there were a lot of the B-Wings did not survive. I think one B-Wing survived the battle. But it was a really cool story where you find out that these things, even though they had their own shields, were heavily armored, and had a lot of firepower, they were not built for starfighter dogfights. They were primarily built as a very heavily armed bomber. So they could take on support ships and capital ships and destroy them, but they were not designed to take on, heavier attacks from starfighters, which we kind of see played out in the sequel series in Last Jedi, where you see not the B-Wings, but those bombers, which were obviously designed to take out, capital ships and stuff like that. Unfortunately, you saw them that they were so big that even though they had their cannons and stuff like that, the TIE fighters were easily able to take them out. So that I always thought was interesting, is that we went from the B-Wing to these really big bombers, but maybe they just needed, more B-Wings to do the attacks from multiple angles. But I don't know what happened with that. We never find out exactly what happened to the B-Wing design, though I think the original prototype of the Blade Wing should have been used a lot more. But I am almost certain, just in my own personal view, that when we see that Star Destroyer destroyed in Return of the Jedi in the background of Admiral Akbar, I am almost certain that that's one of the ones that's destroyed by Blade Squadron and the B-Wings. So if you get a chance to go back and watch Return of the Jedi, I highly recommend going back and watching that scene, because I just think it's super cool. And I'm sure that's one of the things. And also look up the Blade Squadron story. You should be able to look that up online. Just look up Blade Squadron, B-Wings, Return of the Jedi. I'm almost certain that that story has been released. I want to say that Wizard originally released it. Like I said, I'm not sure if it was Star Wars Insider, Starlog, or Wizard Magazine. I know one of them published it, so I know that story's out there because I had it for myself. It's probably buried among my collection down in my basement. But I know that the story is out there, so I highly recommend going and looking that up. Okay, moving on. So that is the end of my facts this week. I hope you all enjoyed the detail I went in on that. I always have a lot of fun working on this. It's so much fun for me to get to work on this kind of stuff, and I really enjoy it personally. I mean, just looking up these facts and researching this kind of stuff, it's the kind of thing that I've lived for since I was a kid, because I really love Star Wars. I've loved it ever since I was a kid, and anytime I get the opportunity to do more research into it, it's always so much fun, and I really enjoy getting to do it.